Hi guys, good to have you here. Now, if this is your first time, my name is Jose, and welcome everyone. Now, the reason why I invited you here today is because I want to talk with you about why parents abuse. The reasons are dynamic. Everybody's different. Everyone has different temperaments, different situations, different upbringings, different circumstances. So it's dynamic. Um, However, there are a number of risk factors that make it more likely the parents will abuse. And that's what I would like to talk with you about today. What are these risk factors? Now, let's start with the history of the parents. What is the parents' history with child abuse and mistreatment? Were they abused? If they were abused, then the chances are that they will continue that cycle. It's more likely that they will if they were abused. Now, in my upbringing, my mother was very abusive, emotionally abusive, physically, mentally, and she was repeating that cycle because her grand my grandfather rather my grandfather, her father, was very abusive to her. Extremely. He was a mean drunk. When he got home from work or the bar, in between, he would be violent with everybody in the house. My mother and every other child, my grandmother, everyone. It's like an explosion every time he came to the house. And so it was very, very rough for my mother growing up. She told me about a time where he chased her with a brick. So that just shows the level of abuse because that's lethal. Hitting someone with a brick is lethal. As you can see, my mother was not able to stop the cycle. She was not strong enough to do that. She didn't have the resources to do that. Personal resources and the community resources. So it continued. Now with my father, he was emotionally neglectful. He wasn't so much physically abusive, but emotionally abusive by not showing love to his kids, by not showing enough attention to make us feel like we matter. So his abuse was of a different kind. Now, he didn't talk a lot about his own childhood. There was one time, though, that he shared when he was a child, his mother put a plate of food in front of him. He pushed it away, like, I don't want that. And my paternal grandfather gave him a slap on the face that caused him to his nose and his mouth to bleed, right? There was blood all everywhere, he said. So even though he didn't share a lot, that shows that his father was capable of it. He was capable of abusing his children and his wife too. Even though there was not a lot of information from him about his childhood. So that's one factor, one very important factor. Now, another risk factor is substance abuse. Is there substance abuse in the family, right? If alcohol or any other drug has taken over the parent's life, their ability to be a parent and their ability to be a good husband or a good wife, that will increase the likelihood of abuse. Now, there was no substance abuse while I was growing up. I never saw it. Um, but my mother did share, and my father didn't deny, that he was an alcoholic and he was a violent alcoholic when I was an infant. And my brother was a year older than me. So even though I don't remember it, my older brother did remember, and he did witness my father hit my mother when he came drunk from work, and he always remembered that, and that's one reason why he never really got along with my father, because he did remember those times, and it did affect him. Absolutely, it affected him deeply, in a deep sense. And even though I don't remember, it affected me as well. It obviously, because even though I don't remember it consciously, it affected me on a deeper level, in ways that I probably don't understand. So, substance abuse disorder. I remember my grandfather was an alcoholic, my maternal grandfather, and he abused his family. And my paternal grandfather was also an alcoholic and abused, he showed signs of abuse. Um, so that was definitely in our generation, right? In our generational home, okay? Now, another risk factor is physical and mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, if a person is suffering from any mental conditions, it's going to make parenting that much harder, that much more challenging than it already is. So, even though there's people that have mental health conditions and are still good parents, and they're still great parents, it just raises the risk. Because remember, this works with other risk factors, right? That work together. Now, my mother, she was diagnosed with severe depression. She told us that it happened before we were born. She was diagnosed in Puerto Rico, but there were no follow-up services. I never heard anything about mental illness or mental health when I was growing up. There were no services, and that's one reason why the abuse continued, because my mother needed the help. She needed help, and there was no help. There was a hospital. There was help for physical things to an extent, but mental health was not even heard of. So that definitely was a risk factor in our home. Um, okay, and one more thing I want to add is when we came to the United States, she was quickly diagnosed and deemed disabled. It happened very quickly. So that shows that she needed help for that when we were growing up. That she indeed did. Now, another risk factor is social economic stress from financial stress, unemployment, or medical problems. Now, if the income is not stable, then I cannot pay my rent. And that's going to cause stress. And stress is going to bring back up those feelings of insecurity, those feelings of being attacked, those feelings that the world, life, the universe is against me, conspiring against me. It's going to bring all that back. So now growing up, there, as when I remember my childhood, I don't remember any financial situations where there was no food or when we were on the street or anything like that, right? But it did happen when I was an infant because my father, he split, right? I was born, my older brother was born, I was born. I was an infant, he was around maybe one or less. And my father split. He left my mother in Puerto Rico by herself. So that caused my mother, obviously, to be under financial stress. She was thrown out of houses, instability in the housing, instability in the food, because my mother said she had a very, very hard time with acquiring food because my grandmother would help her, but she could only do so much. And remember, my grandfather was an alcoholic, so he that was another factor affecting how much my grandmother could help, because he would take a lot of the money and drink it, use it to drink. So that definitely was caused my it caused my mother to be under a lot of stress, which triggered her own insecurities, her own lack of perseverance, her lack of I can do it, and what that did, right? It cascaded down to us, right? She told me about about a situation when I was an infant, that my belly, right? If you, I'm sure you've seen images of children that are malnourished in other parts of the world. That a sign of malnourishment, right, is an inflated abdomen, right, inflated belly, and that happened to me as a child, as an infant. And my mother, in her psychotic thinking, thought that I was possessed. She thought that that was part of the she thought that that was a sign that I was possessed, right? And she took me to a priest, and they did I guess they did a baptism, and I guess went away. But again, it was malnutrition. That's what it was. And so definitely a lack of resources, a lack of stability, right? Social economic stress. Now, another risk factor, think about, is a lack of understanding about the basic childhood development, right? About basic childhood development. Expecting children to be able to do things they are not ready for, okay? Expecting them to complete tasks they're not ready for. Now, this is when a parent can push a child, a parent can be impatient with a child, right? And again, this will cause the parents, it will trigger the parents' own insecurities and a sense of, I can't do this, right? I can't do things right. It could trigger that type of thinking in the parent, and trigger anger in the parent as well. That will raise the likelihood that the parent can abuse. So when I was a child, I did bedwetting. I did that for many years. And my mother, not understanding that this is not that unusual for children up until the age of 7, took it upon herself to try to make it stop through abuse. I remember Saturday mornings, very vivid, where I will be in the living room watching the morning cartoons with my brother, and I will hear her scream my name. And I already knew exactly what she wanted. So I helplessly walked to the room, and she will have the belt wrapped around her fists and say to me, "Quítate la camisa, take off your shirt." And then she will start unleashing on me with the belt until her arms got tired. I say that because there was no mercy, no compassion, no understanding. And the only reason she stopped was because her arm got tired. So, definitely a lack of understanding of child development, because, as I mentioned already, this is not that unusual for children up into the age of 7. Now, I actually went beyond the age of 7. I went up to the age of 11, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's also known that abuse, trauma, causes bedwetting. And so it did for me. And the reason I know it did, for a fact, is because when we moved to the United States, it stopped. At age 11, it just stopped by itself. No punishment, nothing. And the reason it did is because I was in a new place. To me, a new place meant change, not the same, right? Because that part where I grew up, right, I associated that with pain and misery, because that's where I grew up and that's all there was. And on top of that, my mother stopped with the physical abuse. She stopped because she was told that here in the United States, they don't accept that. they will take your children away. If she did what if she did to me what if she did to me what she did to me in Puerto Rico, here in the United States, they will take me away. And I guess she didn't want that. So yeah, a lack of understanding of child development, very very important. Lack of parenting skills, right? Lack of parenting skills. That ties in with lack of understanding of childhood development. Um, our My mother and father um, didn't have parenting skills. They didn't know how to deal with us, right? With children, they're kids, right? Kids do things. Kids upset you. Kids are kids, right? But they didn't understand that. They didn't have the parenting skills. The way they dealt with us, one of the one of the ways they dealt with us, they like to do, was curse our future. And I tell you how. They will say to us, we hope that one day you find yourself eating cigarette butts from the streets. Okay? And they say this to us with such anger, and hate, that it went deep inside of us, you know. And not only that, they wanted it to stick. They wanted to make sure that it stick, right, and it stays with us. And they did this by saying to us, now when a parent wishes something upon a child, it sticks like the stain of plantain. Now, plantain, as you know, is this big green banana, Puerto Rico. And when you get the stain of a plantain on your shirt, it's like grass stains, right? It's very hard to come off. So they absolutely lack the parenting skills, so very important to have those parenting skills, to get educated. And again, that wasn't available. I never heard of anything regarding parenting and improve parenting skills. Didn't hear about it. Didn't see my mother engage in it, or my father. Now, a lack of support from family, friends, neighbors, or the community at large. And like I was just mentioning, there was no support for mental health, there was no support for parenting skills, no support for family in the way of family intervention, and there was definitely no support for children. There was no support. So much so that one time my brother and I ran away. And when my mother went to the police said to her, when you get them, when you catch them, bring them here, and I'm gonna chop them up right here. I'm gonna chop them up right here. So that shows. Another thing that shows the lack of support for children was teachers. Teachers were allowed to hit us. If we didn't know the answer to something, either they'll take a ruler wrapped with tape and just whack your hand, or pick you up by your sideburns. Again, no support for children, no support for families, no mental support. So that lack of support. With family and friends, my family could only do so much. Remember, abuse is multi-generational. There were also victims of abuse themselves. My mother's mother, her sisters and brothers were also victims. So there was no support there. Not a whole lot of support that they could give. And on my father's side, they didn't really get along. There was a lot of strife between my mother and my father's family. So there was very little support there too. So when you feel alone, right, you feel scared, right? And when you don't have the resources, the mental resources, or the education, again, it triggers those feelings of insecurity that come from childhood. And then what follows fear? Anger follows fear, right? Anger is usually not too far behind. Now, taking care of a child with physical or intellectual disabilities is another risk factor. And the reason for that is that it takes more effort to meet the basic needs of a child in that condition. Now, we see people out there, right? Plenty of people that take care of children with special needs, and they do a terrific job. But remember that these risk factors don't operate alone. They are in conjunction with other risk factors, right? That influence one another and make each other more potent. Myself, growing up, I had no intellectual conditions, any intellectual disability or any physical disability. However, my mother did. She had her mental condition. And due to her mental condition, she would fabricate delusions. And one delusion that she fabricated, one of the most hurtful delusions, was that I was possessed by an evil spirit. So, in her twisted mind, there was something wrong with me, even though there wasn't. And this was the basis for her extreme abuse. She focused on me. She was more severe toward me when it came to abuse. And so she basically singled me out for severe abuse. And so in a way, this risk factor was there because she fabricated it. She fabricated that I was different, that I was odd, that I was creepy, but it all originated in her psychotic mind. So, caring for a child with special needs is another risk factor. Now, family stress or crisis caused by domestic violence, relationship turmoil, separation, or divorce. Now, whenever there is crisis in the home, that's definitely a risk factor for abuse, for neglect, because the foundation of the family is being shaken. And family depends on stability. So now in my childhood, as already mentioned, there was very little stability. There was, from past generations, domestic abuse, alcohol abuse, neglect. Emotional neglect is a form of turmoil because there's no love, there's no bonding. So when there is no bonding, The children don't attach to their parents like they're supposed to, and that could cause a host of other problems as they grow up because they're looking for someone else to attach to, and they usually do to their friends, and they do what their friends want them to do, and that's what usually gets them in trouble. So that is another risk factor: family stress and crisis. Now, one more risk factor is personal mental health issues, including low self confidence and feelings of incompetence and shame. And I believe we have gone through that throughout our discussion. My mother suffered from mental health issues. Obviously, she suffered from low self confidence and feelings of incompetence because she could not deal with us. She could not deal with her children. The job of the parent. She was not up to it. And feelings of shame, she carried that from her own childhood and never dealt with it, never looked at it and scrutinized it. She never did that. So what happened instead? All those feelings of shame from her and my father were thrown upon us, upon the children. And we were forced to carry their shame, which became our shame. Until I look at it, until I see it for what it is. So, these are factors, right? Factors that increase the likelihood that parents will abuse. Now, remember, everybody's an individual. Everybody has their own strengths, their own weaknesses, their own temperament, and each situation is unique. Now, if you see these in your own home or in the home of a friend or a family member, it will be good for you to discuss it with the person. Or look at it. If it's in your own home, look at it. Do some research. Today we live in the information age. It's easy to do research today. So you see any of these, look them up, and don't be afraid to look at it because it will lose its power. Whatever has a hold on you, it will lose its power when you look at it because awareness is a powerful, powerful thing. All right, so please, if you have any comments, if there's something that I didn't touch on, any risk factors that you think people should know about, please leave them in the comments. And if you found this discussion interesting, please give it a like. And if you look forward to more discussions like this one, please go ahead and subscribe. And let me say, it was a pleasure spending some time with you. And you have yourself a wonderful day. Take care.